Welcome to the Cinematologist podcast. This is the first episode of season 16, and it's really great to be back with you after what's been a long, hot summer, I think. Now, at this point, I usually introduce Neil, of course. But the first piece of headline news is that Neil is going to take a sabbatical for this season. Now, there's nothing to worry about. He is going to be coming back. There's no fundamental creative differences. I haven't kind of kidnapped him and disposed of him somewhere kind of gruesome in some schlocky horror movie. He actually needs to take time out to finish his book on music documentaries and focus on work. And we've talked about that a little bit in the past. You know, the demands of the podcast. It does take a lot of work in the preparation and the editing and, of course, the recording, which, you know, we love doing. We're not complaining about that. But with higher education demands and with family demands and with wanting to work on other projects, I think it was just the right time for him to step away. And I'll probably be doing this the same myself because I do have book and film projects that I want to work on. But he will be back for the next season, and he sends everyone his warmest regards, and we send him the same, and he'll definitely be missed. So that left me really with a question for this season: how to fill the Neil-shaped void. And I decided that I was going to have a series of guest hosts for this season, and luckily enough, I've got two guest hosts on this episode. You know, it's a chance to expand the voices that are on the podcast and to, you know, bring as many different viewpoints as we can onto the show. And you know that we like to do that. So with that in mind, it's my great pleasure to welcome the producer, filmmaker, writer, and previous guest on the show, James Dean. James, welcome. It's great to have you back on. And thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dario. I'm really delighted to be on with you.
Yeah, so you've been on before, way back when we did the Tony Manero episode, the Pablo Larraín film. I don't know, have you got any memories of that? What was the experience like for you?
I've got, really good memories of it, because I think for everyone there, the film was just such a surprise, and the response in the room was great. And I think all of us, you know, just felt like we'd seen something incredibly special and different, and, you know, something from Chile that, you know, where we don't see too much cinema. And he's obviously turned out to be such a significant filmmaker subsequent to that. And, you know, I sort of look forward to every film he does now. But Tony Manero is kind of an early one where we really discovered him. And it was just a fantastic occasion, I think. Still think about it.
We actually used your voice on one of our more experimental podcasts because you were so good at sort of getting into the weeds on that film. And you mentioned there Pablo Larraín, who obviously did Jackie and now has recently done Spencer. Were you a Spencer fan, considering now, you know, obviously there's what's going on, you know, with the royal family and at the moment. I don't want to get into the politics or anything of that, but just it was an interesting film, which I wanted it to be even more bonkers than it actually was.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like, you know, in this week where we obviously have kind of complete saturation of the royal family for obvious reasons, I was thinking about that film and how it didn't quite deliver. And I think part of the problem for it wasn't its own fault, but that The Crown had kind of sort of stolen its thunder with a pretty pointed depiction of Charles and Diana in that series. And so it was sort of left very little room for him to sort of say anything truly new or interesting. And even though she was excellent in it, Kristen Stewart, it didn't quite break through, I didn't think, into a sort of in the way that it needed to on the back of The Crown.
Yeah. I to be honest, I haven't watched The Crown, and I'm not a kind of royal film follower or TV follower. But yeah, I thought Kristen Stewart was great, and I kind of appreciated, you know, some of the kind of weird gothic aesthetics in it, and that whole psychological thing about food as well. But yeah, it just kind of didn't land, I don't think, as you say. But always a filmmaker, Larraín, who I'm looking forward to seeing his movies. I mean, Just for yourself, James. I mean, I know obviously the audience gets to know myself and Neil's tastes in films, in nauseating detail. But I don't know, do you have a kind of sort of self-reflexively have a taste in movies, or are you somebody who will take anything on face values? What's your usual go-to kind of film?
I can watch anything for sure. I'm not averse to going to the cinema and watching some Hollywood stuff. Though I'm not big on the Marvel universe, or I like original work where I can find it. That's kind of a marker for me. And for the last few decades, my favorite filmmakers have been Coen Brothers, Pedro Almodovar, Wes Anderson. Those are and before that, Woody Allen. But those are the filmmakers that have kind of followed me through my life, that I've always felt were my filmmakers. But there's just always amazing films to discover every year from all the corners of the earth, and I'll literally go and see anything I can, if I have the time.
Yeah, I think, it's part of the ethos of the show is having that kind of open mind. And you mentioned the Coen brothers there, of course, just a trailer for later on in the season. You're going to come back and do the live Blood Simple episode. So really looking forward to that. But maybe before we get onto the main bulk of the show, with your own work, your own sort of producing, can you say anything about what we talked about the other night at the venue about your up-and-coming independent film? Because it sounds amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I've worked with some writers and director before on another feature I made called Discoverdale that was about, almost a decade ago now. And we've been developing a project ever since then called Apocalypse Clown that we finally got the funding for and made earlier in the year, and we're just finishing it off now. We announced it at Cannes. It stars David Earl, who was in the brilliant Brian and Charles that came out a few months ago, and yeah, we're really excited about it. It's about four clowns on a sort of mad road trip across Ireland, trying to turn the power back on. The power's gone out. And of course, it's a sort of voyage of self-discovery for them and what it means to be a clown and so on. But we're really happy with it. And it should come out next year at some point. And hopefully we can I'll have a bit more to say about it in a few months' time when we do the Blood Simple episode.
Yeah, for sure, and definitely, it sounds like something that I think will be really great for the students at my new university. So that would be great to screen it there. So the other reason that you are a great choice for this episode is because that you were at our first live screening. So we went up to the Manchester Home Cinema, which had been kind of, we'd sort of organised this a while ago, and it came out of conversations with the fantastic Caroline Catz, who we'd covered her film, Delia Derbyshire, The Myths and Legendary Tapes, which was a great film, a great sort of experimental documentary which kind of blurred the boundaries of truth and fiction, and not your typical biopic, but just a fascinating piece of work. And Caroline was such an interesting persona with a passion for cinema. And we said to her, is there anything you fancy screening back in Manchester? Because that's where she's from. And after sort of a little bit of back and forth, she decided that we would screen Alain Tanner's Jonah, who will be 25 in the year 2000. I don't know whether that's the longest title we've had on the Cinematologist, but it must be close. So this was actually, directed by Tanner, but co-written by him and John Berger, who is, a great inspirational writer, critic and artist to Caroline and myself, particularly for me with ways of seeing that classical documentary. I'd heard of Alain Tanner, but I'd never watched any of his films, let alone this one. And I purposely didn't watch it beforehand because I wanted that kind of jeopardy in the room, knowing that Caroline loved it and had seen it so many times. James, I don't know, did you come to this film like completely blind, and did you know anything about the filmmaker?
I'm exactly where you were, Dario. I'd heard of it because the title is so eye-catching. It's like it's a deeply uncommercial title in a way, which made me laugh, and I felt like that that I'd seen it in, flicking through maybe the BFI brochure or something like that, and it definitely caught my eye. And I just heard a little bit about it, but when you guys said you were going to see it, I was like, I've been wanting to see this film for years. That's one of the great things. So I was glad to be in Manchester to come and see it with you. And it definitely delivered. It was great.
Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. I mean, again, I think you'll hear from the Q&A. It's for us on stage, Caroline was talking a lot about it because she'd seen it many times. I found it quite difficult to talk about because, and that's unusual for me, but it was just so brimming with ideas that were interconnected in so many different ways. And I think with the audience, there was about 25 or 30 in the audience, a very mixed group, I think. And they came out with some amazing stories, which you'll hear right now. And yeah, James, I think we'll sort of pick up on some of those afterwards, because it really hit me on kind of an emotional way, much more than I'd anticipated, listening to some of the stories that came out in the Q&A afterwards. So let's get straight into that. So this is myself with Caroline Catz at the Manchester Home Cinema, introducing and discussing Jonah, who will be 25 in the year 2000. Thank you very much indeed. Welcome to the Cinematologist podcast, live from Manchester Home Cinema. This is the first episode of the new season. It's great to be live. This is the first one live we've done since COVID. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my co-host for tonight, who was flown in especially for this event, the director, writer, actor, all-round Renaissance woman, Caroline Catz. Thank you very much, Caroline, for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Thanks for coming out this afternoon.
So I had an entire intro planned out. This is what I was going to say. This is how I was going to intro everything. And then 2 days ago, Alain Tanner, the director of this film, passed away. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to rewrite that, a little bit more focus on Alain and his movies. And then this afternoon on the train up from London, Jean-Luc Godard dies. Obviously very sad. I'm not making light of it at all, but I don't want this to be one long eulogy. But Caroline, I don't know, what do you make of all this? Is this sort of a further reminder that cinema of the 20th century, when it was right at the heart of cultural, social and political conversation, I suppose, that's now kind of getting further away? How do you feel about these sort of guys passing away?
Well, haven't they left us such an amazing legacy and incredible, inspiring films that have been groundbreaking and all those sorts of things that people are saying today, because so Alain Tanner is not as well known as Jean-Luc Godard, but I think they sort of definitely have their roots in a similar school and a similar place. Yeah, so Alain Tanner isn't as well known as Godard, but he had an incredible body of work, an individual, unique mind, a brilliant collaborator, always fascinated by different methods of storytelling in film and breaking new ground. So in that respect, I think, like all great artists, they will remain, and their work will continue. And so, yes, whilst they're gone, reverberations of all of their work will be ever present.
Yeah, and what's interesting, we'll come to this in a second, is this film particularly, I didn't really realise how many great filmmakers love this movie. It's like in their sort of, their pantheon of movies that influenced them. But maybe we could kick off just very quickly with yourself. You're from Manchester, and I was just wondering, it's an area you've hung out in before all of this building was here. So I just wondered how much the city sort of played a role in your formative experiences, particularly around cinema.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I got up early this morning and had a walk around. I mean, there's hardly any reference points. I left in 1988, which sounds like 1,000 years ago now, doesn't it? When you look at the city and how it's changed. This is a city that I've absolutely loved. I probably turned 16 when the corner house opened, or maybe 15, something like that. It was a massive part of my life. It was of my teenage years. It was, that little corner. If I wasn't at the corner house, I was at the Hacienda, or I was at the Ritz, or whatever. I mean, this little sort of pocket of town was my everything. The corner house particularly. I remember getting in to see Sid and Nancy before I was old enough.
Wow.
I remember seeing Subway, that amazing French film, Betty Blue, loads of Godard films. I mean, it was a massive education, and we were so lucky to have it. And I think in terms of filmmaking, storytelling, being an actor, how lucky was I to have the Library Theatre and the Royal Exchange Theatre. This was all in the 70s and 80s. It was a fantastic place to be exposed to art. I think it always has been, and it's amazing seeing it thriving the way it is, and it's even more exciting now than it was then. So, but I don't recognise it. I find it really hard to find my way around. I absolutely insisted that I was not going to put my Google Maps on to get here today from Princess Street, because I thought that would be really, really sad if I couldn't even get myself down here. But it did take a while, though, I will say that.
Yeah, I couldn't do anything as romantic as that, because I don't know the area, I'm afraid, to get here. And obviously, this is an amazing, a venue. As we were walking up, I couldn't believe how big it was on each floor. And it's wonderful to come out again, with the podcast to different cinemas. And I mean, again, as a filmmaker, there are advantages with this shift to streaming, which has been exacerbated by COVID, and that does have its advantages. But I'm a big advocate of the screening experience, and I'm sure you are coming out to the cinema and having this environment to watch films in.
Yeah, I mean, I think this film is such an amazing film to revive, and I hope that there's going to be more attention on it. It was really brilliant to see it so featured in Alain Tanner's obituary. They speak about it a lot. I was really fascinated about this film because I came to it because of John Berger. I had been a big fan of John Berger's for years and years. His writing, firstly, sure, and also his theatre collaborations with Simon McBurney for Complicité, I was really fascinated by. And then I saw him and Simon McBurney speaking about a piece they did, The Vertical Line. Right. And it was this amazing piece that was like a sound piece, and they explored and excavated in a sort of, history in a straight line, and they describe time as a vertical concept rather than a horizontal concept, and that just absolutely really blew my mind. And they sat there in the cinema. I'll go on and on about this later after we've seen the film, but anyway, watching them both, listening to them talking about that, and talking about time in storytelling, and that sort of archaeological thing of it almost being like a kind of a vertical corkscrew where all of this information we carry down and up between cultures and through generations, sure, culturally and sort of personally. And I think you were asking me about the legacy of these films as well, these fantastic films. I think it isn't like it just sort of stops. It's like a sort of a baton of ideas, and I'm really interested in those collaborations that sort of keep ideas expanding and moving on, and the sort of source of them becomes sort of almost something like ephemeral. You can't quite put your finger on. And I think the cinema of Alain Tanner and John Berger together, they really explore that idea. And in that talk with Simon McBurney about the vertical line, they really sort of investigated that. And that's when I heard about this film. And then they did a retrospective of Berger's work, and they screened the film at the Prince Charles Cinema in it was probably 2009 or something like that. And it absolutely just blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. I was so touched by it and so moved by it, and I couldn't really articulate what that was. I found it on DVD, watched it again, had very similar feelings, looked into it more, and we found out that Alfonso Cuarón names it as his sort of second most important influential film as well. He really says that his film, his sort of dystopian thriller, The City of Men, was really, he says, actually ripped off from this film, which is such an again an idea that thing of that exchange of ideas really interests me, you know. So yeah, that's kind of what happened and how I just discovered the film for myself. But you never get to see it at cinema, hardly ever. So for me, it's very exciting to share it with you today, and we'll get to see it properly.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that. Caroline chose the movie. It was the first one that kind of popped up in her mind. What we've done is, I haven't seen it before, so it's my first time. So we have this kind of differentiation where you've seen it many times, I haven't seen it at all. And please come back afterwards. We'll have Q&A time to discuss what you guys felt about it as well. So this is Jonah, who will be 25 in the year 2000. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for staying. Wow. I don't know where to start. I mean, look, I can talk about films for, forever, but there's I literally don't know where to start. There's so many ideas sort of bursting.
I think that was the first thing. When I rewatched it a few weeks ago, I had a piece of paper in front of me. I thought, I'll just write notes all the way through. And at the very end, all I'd written was ideas. It's just a film that's just full of ideas in a way it's not entirely overwhelming because it has a logic that it keeps repeating, which is really simple. But it's full of these. It's just, I feel it's really good-willed. I don't feel it's over-intellectual, or even though it kind of goes into areas like that. But there's a lot of charm with it, I think. And it's a film about resistance and resilience and our relationship to one another and our relationship to the land and to the
society
and everything. I mean, there's so many themes in it that obviously, I mean, it was just like watching it. It's like if that was made now without the amazing, beautiful 70s period costumes, you could feel all those ideas. We're right in that now.
Yeah. I mean, that was I mean, I don't know what you guys thought about that, but just the sense that it's still prescient, and this idea of cyclical time, and again, it's related to the land, I think, but also talked about, 1917 and then 45 and then 68, and you could add 92, 2008 and 2016. And we're still having the same arguments in many ways over and over. And I think it's a director, it seems to me it's a director who's kind of reckoning with that age-old question about how do you resist the society that is imposed upon you.
Yeah.
And, even back then they're saying it's impossible to live outside of the system in this film. Yes. And yet you think about it now, how even more impossible it is to live outside of the system.
I know, it's very much, isn't it, about the your personal political experience and living within a structure, and how to reconcile these two things, and is that possible to still maintain your individuality when you've got this whole sort of system around you? And I think, now if you put a sort of digital capitalist lens on that, it suddenly you realise
it expands even more. Yeah.
But I think as well, I think it's really interesting. I like the idea that they're talking about the fact that there is courage in expressing hope and experiencing hope, and that isn't. It's not, you mustn't ever mistake that as naivety.
Yeah,
and that there's this thought that, cynicism is death. I mean, we sort of know that in a way, but I think there's so many themes like that in it. But a simpler theme, a more fun aspect of it is: did you notice that all the characters have got the letter M? Start with the letter M.
Yeah.
All of them. And I think that's apparently I didn't realise this till I looked it up today. I was like, what's the symbolism of M? But M is ever creating, life affirming, and
right.
I've got it written down here.
But the letter is supposed to be symbolic of that, right? Okay.
Apparently that it symbolises beginning, a new beginning, never-ending cycle of creation. And I didn't realise as well that it's the 13th. That the M is the symbol for the 13th tarot card, which is also death. So I thought that must all be in there.
I'd imagine if you could sit down with this film and take out all of the elements, you could write like books on what everything means. I think it's fascinating. And
it's encyclopedic, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. And I think, that there's so many little poignant moments. I mean, imagine sequences, dream sequences to a certain degree. The truth is there, but it's not in front of you because you've got the societal... and
sometimes, sometimes
hiding
they're
the truth,
premonitions, and sometimes they're fantasies, and sometimes it's just archive, historical
absolutely,
footage. So I think it's really interesting the way they've used that. It's kind of totally punctuated by those sorts of moments that are driven always by whatever space that character is in at that point.
The other thing that really sort of kind of appealed to me as an aspect was the teacher, really, because that's what I do. And I definitely want to take a suitcase of blood sausages with a meat cleaver into my students next week, but I'll probably get arrested if I try that. But, we in the universities and in schools as well, we're kind of encouraged towards this, what's known as student-centered learning these days, where it's kind of like you're not supposed to top down or an authoritarian style, just impart your knowledge onto the students. That kind of teaching style is seen as very old-fashioned now and, dictatorial. You have to meet the students where they are, what's their experiences. And it's interesting how even back in the day, he's trying to do this, where he's turning around and saying, I'm not going to grade you on what you know. You're going to ask questions, and I'm going to grade you on how interested and inquisitive and curious you are, which is, again, an interesting kind of reversal in that sense.
Yeah, and also Matteo, when he's trying to, grow the children in the greenhouse by asking them questions. Imagining the question, giving them sort of different kinds of questions than they would have in a conventional school.
For sure.
This idea of a progressive idea of learning them. I think when I first saw it, maybe I thought, is it, so naive and idealistic? But I don't see it like that. The more I see it, I see these sort of other layers where it's just people finding their way through with a sort of an impossible context around them, and it doesn't seem so idealistic. It seems more about survival and resistance, and I think that's something that.
Yeah, and I don't know how we'll come out for questions in a second, but like I really, as the film went on, I felt more and more. I don't know whether the word's bittersweet or a little bit melancholic, that it is this continuous question of how do you deal with the society and the situation that you live in. Most of us, I would say, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, do what the farmer said in that one of those asides, where we build the bricks up around us so that it protects ourselves from the truth that is out there. So I think I read that as kind of meaning we accept the fact that we have to go out to work and we haven't got a choice in that, even if we don't like it. And we find a way kind of psychologically to be able to live in the world. Yeah, what I was going to ask actually, in relationship to your last film, which is called Delia Derbyshire, The Myths and Legendary Tapes, which you should all go watch. And the reason I want to ask you about that is because of the formal elements of the film, because your film has fictional documentary crossover and blurred ideas around what is truth and fiction and stuff. So I wondered, is that something that sort of influenced you from these ideas of reality and representation sort of blurring together?
Yes, those ideas of where does the truth lie, and that in the end it is a very subjective take. When you look at, like, for me, I was looking at Delia's life, and in the end I could only tell the story from the vantage point of this person that had absorbed so much about her from other people. And there were so many projections and so many ideas, so the film had to become an investigation into her archive and finding a framework with which to do that, which in the end became kind of in a way a bit more of a Brechtian take on it. Which I think they do a lot in this.
Yeah.
And definitely watching this opened me up to that idea of, you just have to make, as long as you make your vantage point clear, then you can explore in all kinds of directions. It's important to create that world very early and soon, and I think I got that from there.
Yeah. As long as the structure works, you can come out of romantic realism, and the audience is smart enough, in most cases, to kind of understand what's going on. And I think you're right about this film, where it doesn't connect the vignettes in a specific way, or really on the nose kind of way, but still where you are at all times.
And there's very much a sort of a lightness of touch with all the political ideas, all the philosophical ideas. There's a lot of humour. It's not heavy-handed. It's not this sort of polemic. It's not this message that you have to carry away with you. It kind of has. It very much welcomes you in, and that's what I really love about the sort of work of John Berger as well. Reading as well. There's always this sort of lightness and welcoming in of ideas and exchanging of ideas, and I think that was another thing that really inspired me with that. It's like, because some of the, that idea of trying to do something that's a bit more Brechtian, as in you are exposing the fact that you're making a film, and like they were there exploring the different characters, and doing sort of role play and singing songs to one another, and sort of it I would imagine on paper it might look, if you try and give that to finances, how's that going to look,
going to write your proposal for your budget for this. It's like, I'm going to do this, that. Yeah, okay.
How far you can push some of those really theatrical ideas in film. Like when you see something like Dogville, and you see that really, really stripped down, that Lars von Trier film. I've always been really inspired by how many theatrical devices work in a cinematic way. And I really wanted to explore that in Delia for the same reason that you're sort of exposing the content for what it is. As in, this is not a biopic. This is not a real representation of this person's life. This is a take and a gathered thoughts, gathered pieces of fragments of information. And again, that thing comes to me always with John Berger's work in his writing, and I can see it in this film too. That idea of there is no definitive truth about life or death. You just have to find a way in and frame it as a storyteller.
Sure.
So yeah, that interests me a lot.
So, we have a question already, sir. Please.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for bringing this film back. Probably haven't seen it since it first materialised, came into the cinema. I actually have two nephews who were born in 1975, so it kind of chimes with me anyway. But the point I was coming to, I think you've touched on it, is the fact that Berger is an educationalist, and there's two incarnations in Mathieu and the secondary school teacher, and the point I was kind of thinking about is what if it was made today, as you kind of suggested it might, be. What would the themes be? And it seems to me that the major theme, obviously, of the day is climate change. And I'm kind of, through an organisation called Climate Emergency Manchester, I've got involved in scrutinising the scrutiny committees of the City Council, which is kind of like a wheeze that I thought was worth trying. So I look at the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee, and it was brought to the attention just last week of the scrutiny and of Children and Young People scrutiny that there's a government white paper that came out in April, which may out of the DFE, which may or may not see the light of day with changes of education minister every 5 minutes. But the point being, the chair of the committee said at the end of it, this is privatisation of education. And, when you see those examples of inspirational teaching going on there, it is sad to see that there's this thing called MATS, which I've not come across before, multi-academy trusts that can be anywhere over the country and have no democratic control.
Yeah, they've been around a while already.
Have they? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was news to me anyway.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that into the mix, really. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who teaches, I think from the film there, I was kind of very aware of that idea of we as teachers are often, as we're part of the problem, let's put it that way, in terms of we have a set criteria of things that we have to cover, and universities and schools want us to cover things that essentially can be shown to get students jobs. That's the be-all and end-all of it. So there's that whole kind of, what are we doing? We're preparing people to be economic cogs in a machine, not to think critically or not to examine what they want to do in the world. So there's that element to it. And I think you're right with the environmental thing, because I mean, it was a great line in the film where it talks about vegetables are democratic, and it's kind of like they're not anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's actually too expensive to cook fresh food these days. Do you know what I mean? And you've got to buy the cheap processed stuff,
But even there, isn't she talking about, I mean, not so much on the educational side of things, but in terms of the vegetable production. There she is marking out these 27 chemicals that the government are insisting that they're kind of having to
put on the exactly.
She's an organic farmer, still struggling even then in those days, trying to sort of struggle with being able to do that.
Sure.
And that was 75 or 76, wasn't it?
I mean, again, like in reference to this film being made now, I think that sense, maybe even we're at the point where the sense that the cycle is actually being broken. If people are kind of very environmentally critical, I think that is possibly an argument that would be made. That's the problem, that we're undermining the potential for us to recycle. I don't know how you feel about this summer, but I feel like something has changed this summer with the heat. It seems like there has been a sort of sea change in that sense of how different things felt this summer.
Yeah, in terms of that, but in terms of how desperate we are, it's terrifying to think that all these conversations have been had for 50, 60 years.
Sure.
And we're sort of right at the end and we've got no time left. I think that's the depressing side of this, because you think, God, if something was done about it in 1976 and we were taking all these ideas seriously, and it's the idea that campaigning for climate is, a new idea. It's been since, way before 68 or whatever. He was talking about the outcome of 68 being, there's all this stuff now, whole earth societies and macro food production and tantric sex and kids running around with dirty faces and messy hair, and that's it. But there were many elements of that resistance that was that we are still
we're trying to embody it, aren't we? But it's more and more difficult.
Too late.
It's
hopefully not too late. Anyway, I was thinking about those two. I mean, he was in his 90s, wasn't he, when he died? Berger, I think, 91.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And Alain Tanner too,
92.
92.
Yeah.
Yeah, just thinking kind of that incredible lifespan and that incredible life experience and the message that they've left, I think, is really hugely important, and we should get this film revived.
Yeah. We'll have to find out where they sourced it from and get it onto a disc for sure. Any other questions or comments? The lady at the back, and then the gentleman in the middle.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, rather like my friend at the back here, that I'm very grateful you brought this film back, because it has very personal connotations for me. One of my dearest friends who was supposed to come with me tonight has a son called Jonah, who was born and was 25 in the year 2000.
Wow.
And he was named after this film. And in fact, the closeness of our two families meant that my son, when his son was born, called him Jonah. And we wanted to come and see this film together, because we have two Jonahs who've both been inspired by this film.
How amazing.
And of course, it's a film about our generation, because we were revolutionaries in the 60s, we were teachers in the 70s. Many of the issues that this film touches on are films that affected us very fundamentally. And many of the people I can identify with. I can remember teaching sociology in the mid-70s. And I think certainly teaching has changed dramatically then. This is a time when, and I noticed Piaget's name coming up on the credits at the end, as a time of Ivan Ilyich's deschooling society and a whole move away from formal education and looking at different ways to school children, different ways to teach children. And I can remember taking my child out of a very formal primary school and putting him into a much more different environment. It was another school, but it was a school run in very different kinds of ways. I had friends who taught at Summerhill. I had people who were very much in that movement. And I think, I don't think we could make a film like that at the moment. No. I don't think we could, because I think that era of late 60s and 70s was a period of, well, it was a very liberative period. It was a period at the beginning of the women's liberation movement. So you had all those kind of experiments with sexuality, people living in communes, people living in a ménage à trois. All those kind of things were happening then, which people are slightly askance of now if I talk about it. But also it was a period when people, were looking at society and how we could change it. They were in back rooms with Roneo cassette duplicators, and very involved in all kinds of activities. I think society changed dramatically, certainly in this country in the 80s, because of Thatcherism. A massive sea change. I think today we still have the echoes of that in a significantly more repressive government that, as you say, sees education purely in economic terms. Sure. It doesn't look at education in a very, very much wider way. I remember seeing a repeat of Educating Rita a few months ago. And there's a scene after the tutor has been found drunk late at night, and he has to be hauled in front of various committees. And Rita says to him afterwards, "Did you get the sack?" And he went, "Get the sack?" He said, "I'd have to bugger the bursar to get the sack." And I thought, how different education is now.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that he could continue to be so libertarian, he could teach in a way, yes, he had to get through a syllabus, but the way he did it and how he did it wasn't prescribed in any way, either by the institution he worked for or the government, who, of course, have taken an increasingly more repressive role and in terms of interfering with education and how teachers teach. So I think it's a fascinating and, for me, quite sad look back. But maybe society goes in cycles.
Yes,
I mean,
I think
as you say, there are new campaigns, there are new fights. The environment, obviously, is one of them. But also there's also organizations, there's groups now called like Enough is Enough, which are beginning to say, how far do we go down this road? And people, for the first time, after many generations, actually, now beginning to talk about trade unions in a different kind of way. Whereas I think in the 80s, it was a whole era of killing off the trade union movement.
Yeah, I think we're getting to the point where people are actually angry enough again, maybe.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
And I felt that the other week. I went to one of these Enough is a rally, and I felt there was a buzz there. There was a sense of yes, we're mad at Saddam, we really can't take it anymore. That's another echo from the 70s, that actually people are coming back to it. So maybe we're on a cycle.
Yes,
that's what I wanted to say.
I think that those themes are very much in the film. The idea of the cyclical issues, the way they're bringing up all the different moments of revolution in history, and how that precipitates resistance from all kinds of areas, from an individual place to groups and communities rising up. I think that's what's so interesting about it.
Absolutely. Sir, do you want to...
Yes, just to say I agree with just about everything that you just said. Thank you for bringing this film. I feel very emotional having seen it. It's a film that it seems to me is full of hope and affirms hopeful things in human beings. And I think we need that as much as we need political ideas in a more narrow sense. Brecht, of course, said that socialism was a simple thing so difficult to achieve. It seems to me that he also called for an optimism of the will, a pessimism of the intellect, perhaps, recognizing what the enemy is like and how powerful that can be, but a will, an optimism about the possibilities of the future and of change. I've sat through that kind of living all my yesterdays when I was 16 years old in 1966. I joined an anarchist group, and 2 years later I was in prison, having set fire to an army recruiting office. And
wow! And you lived to tell the tale, at least.
Yes, yes, I did. Prison was extremely unpleasant, I have to say. After that, I went to university. They both taught me a lot. And I think we've been through a terrible period where hope was very hard to find, but always existed. For instance, thinking of those young anarchists that chained themselves to that plane that was going to take people back to the misery and poverty of where they'd come from. And there, it seems to me that what this film is about is precisely that. It's about hope. No matter what, there is hope in what human beings are capable of. And I seem to be sensing that in many ways, as people have said in the various struggles. The thing that in the last few months has really made me feel so positive again is the rebirth of trade unions willing to fight for the working people of the country, which makes it almost possible for me to watch the news without totally shouting at the television every night. Thank you for bringing this film here. It's fantastic. I could watch it again right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. It certainly does make you kind of think about where we are right now, where hopefully, possibly we could be in a few years' time. I mean, God, yeah, I'm not going to start talking about, party politics or anything like that right now. But I mean, it's just interesting that we seem to be at a point where the if I'm going to call it this, the misery is actually going high enough where there's enough people kind of, hang on a minute, this isn't right. And not normally the people who just shrug their shoulders and say, well, yeah, trains are more expensive, food's more expensive. Well, what can you do? I think people are actually saying, well, no, it's not right anymore. Those people who are, quote unquote, middle class are actually feeling that now. And I think that is part of that, in combination with the kind of idealism and that sense of, we can make a difference that young people, generally sort of bring. I think those two in combination are proving a sort of really powerful moment.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like we're at peak misery at the moment, right for, Yeah, come on, Labour, don't screw it up, for Christ's sake. Sorry. Anybody else want to... Sorry, down at the front.
Hi, yeah, thanks for showing this film. It really was fantastic. I think the thing that's interesting about it is none of us are talking about the camera moves or the lighting or...
we haven't got to that yet.
It's because it's just bursting with ideas and your mind is just racing, comparing then to now, and how there's just so many similarities and themes. And in fact, that these are ordinary people. They're not actually taken to the streets. Or, of course, Marie ends up in prison, but that's just because she's kind to pensioners. And they cart her off in the end. And, and she's a little bit broken, but comes back. And I was just laughing to myself because I was thinking normally when you see classrooms now on the TV or in films, the bell goes after about 10 seconds. It's always to sort of end the scene or to start the scene. Now, you never stay in the classroom really and talk about ideas. So when he gets his sausages out, it's actually really exciting. And all those scenes with Marco in the classroom are just phenomenal.
There's no natural ends, though. I mean, again, as a filmmaker, there doesn't seem to be a kind of like moment of fade to black in any of the sequences. They're not jump cuts, but they're abrupt cuts, aren't they?
They also linger at the end of a scene after the dialogue's ended, and it's not like the actors have been told and carry on and improvise. It's like let that awkwardness exist always. Because there's just a sort of little moment of something really interesting when the characters are still sort of fizzing, and then they cut. They do that almost every
for
scene.
Sure. And I think there are really recognisable kind of visual. Well, first of all, the scene with the gun in the mirror, I'm sure Martin Scorsese nicked that. And then when you, like, for example, in the supermarket, there's something, right, we all go to supermarkets, right?
Look amazing
on film, though, they look like dystopian nightmares, like you'd never want to go in a supermarket again,
my favourite supermarket one is the Ipcris file. The Stepford Wives.
Right, oh yeah, of course. And the music, that Muzak in the background.
They always do, they're really compelling to watch, aren't they?
Yeah.
You sort of, when you're actually in them, you just want to get out of them.
Sure.
Yeah.
I love that in the schoolroom as well. I love the little girl knitting. Just awesome, They
were lovely, weren't they? All the students. And I don't know who. Every time I watch it, I really admire the costuming. I mean, I know it's just that was contemporary costume, but it's so beautifully observed. Like all their colours and how sort of individual each character is, and you know almost what they're going to wear next, and there's not too many costumes per person. They're just, they've got a really, really strong identity per character. So beautiful, the textures and colours and stuff.
It's interesting when you see that, like, films that have been shot like this. I mean, the director, he made movies by collaborating with Swiss Television, and he made them on 16mm and had them blown up to 35, and that's how he got his first film made, which is Charles, Dead or Alive. Have I got that right?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. Which unfortunately was on Mubi, but now I think it's disappeared, so you can watch that.
I think now
you could watch that.
Now he's passed away.
Yes, they may put it back. Yeah. Well, one last question, sir. Go ahead to finish us off.
The fact, I mean, Berger was he not, in Switzerland? It's set in Switzerland, and then is that politics between Switzerland and France still relevant in the same kind of way, or is it less so now? It's all EU. I just wonder.
No, I don't know. Like that thing about having to have the pass to work between the two countries.
Yeah.
And maybe, I thought, when I first watched it, I thought it was because she wouldn't have been able to afford to live near where she worked. And then it seemed that she wasn't allowed, maybe because she's a French citizen, but because it was on the border, she was allowed to.
Yeah, that was very specific, that. I don't know whether there was a particular, law in terms of the relationship between the two countries. I mean, just to finish, the other character I really loved was the old guy. I don't know. That actor looks familiar to me. I don't know if...
Oh, God, he's brilliant, isn't he?
I can't think... Maybe he's in Melville movies. That's what he looked like. He was sort of used to be a gangster type, but what a voice, Which I wish he was still alive. Get him on the podcast with that voice.
Incredible face as well, and just a beautiful actor. Really
brilliant.
Amazing.
Well, I think that just about wraps it up. First of all, please thank Caroline for flying in and participating in this. Thank you very much for...
Thank you for having me. Thanks for coming to see it. It was such a brilliant... I love that film so much.
Can you say anything about what you're working on right now or not?
I can, as long as you don't put it on your podcast.
Okay, right. Well, I'll wrap up first, and then you can tell people. The show will be... I will have edited it and I'll put it out by the end of the week. We do a little intro and an outro, so there's a bit extra to what you guys have done here. It's called The Cinematologists, so just Google that please subscribe, tell your friends about it. We've got lots of stuff coming up this season, so it should be really good. Thank you all for coming out on a Tuesday evening. I really appreciate it, and hope to see you again in Manchester.
Thank you.
Est-ce que ce sera mieux pour toi? Le mieux est systématiquement écarté. Je dirais, on ne décidera plus pour nous. La première fois, il ne se passera peut-être rien. La 10e fois, il y aura un comité. La 100e fois, une grève. Et la 101e, encore une leçon de lecture pour toi, Jonas. Autant de fois que je serai sur mon vélo pour aller au travail. Non, plus. Autant de fois que les jours de ma vie.
So, wow, what a Q&A that was. Well, first of all, thanks very much to Jesse and the team from Manchester Home Cinema for being so organised and welcoming and just, making sure that everything ran really smoothly. And also thanks to Jason Wood for helping set this up before he moved on to the BFI. It's an amazing venue, and I'm not surprised that he's been there for so long. But James, you were at the screening. You were in the audience there. I don't know. Where do you want to start? What did you make of the film? What did you make of the event as a whole?
The film was just fantastic. It just went to places that cinema doesn't go that often anymore. It was so much a film of ideas and trying to look at the way people lived then and how they struggled to find meaning in their existence with very little narrative drive. It was a series of different scenes really, and following characters around that you just and that there was unpredictable and surprising, and you had dream sequences. But if you're asked to describe it to someone, it's almost impossible to do. And that was what was so brilliant about it. I was with it all the way, in spite of the fact that there was hardly any narrative sort of momentum in it. It was fantastic.
Yeah. How did you feel about the fact that the Jonah of the title kind of never really arrived until the very end? At one point I was worried. I was like, is this film 3 hours long and I've misread it? Because I kind of expected this kid to turn up halfway through and then, would have sort of been affected by these 8 characters. But I had to sort of put that to the back of my mind, thinking, who is this character going to be,
Yeah, I think what was really clever and insightful about the film was that title was a bit of a tease, where you're thinking, who is Jonah? When is he going to show up, or is the title a complete misdirect? And so it keeps you going. It keeps you wanting to discover who he is and what his significance will be. And then someone gets pregnant and you're thinking, oh, that's probably going to be Jonah in a few months' time, but not for a long time. And so it's one of the sort of seeds that's planted at the start that keeps you hanging on, so you could make that discovery when it happens. And then it does become incredibly meaningful in this world of these adults who are all really struggling and confused and experimenting with life and trying to find a path through it. This child is born into that world and will have his own journey, over the next 25 years of his life. And, we just obviously see a little bit of that. But it was really clever, having said before the screening that it was a cumbersome title, and it actually really lands when you see the film because you're waiting for that moment.
Yeah. Was Jonah an immaculate conception? I couldn't work out whether I'd missed, whether there was a kind of moment of.
Yeah, I think I have to ask Caroline, who's seen it, numerous times, whether that's because I felt like. With a film like this, you pick up a lot of it, but I'm absolutely certain that, with repeated viewings, you'll see all sorts of other things and find other buttons being pushed that weren't there first time around. Yeah, I can't answer that. That's a good question.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because it's kind of like there's these 8 characters sort of who become, I mean, they've all got their own lives, but as the film progresses, they kind of come together, don't they, and spend more time with each other in this one particular. I think farmhouse is the wrong word, but like the one house in the country that they were almost becomes a commune, really. And I couldn't work out whether the mother of Jonah had or maybe that was just open ended and it didn't explain it to you. But one of the things that I was kind of in the Q&A, because of the way that the Q&A went, and we'll get to that in a second, I didn't want to sort of push the more cynical, pessimistic viewpoint that I think the film actually does have underneath. I mean, it does have a kind of idealism and a hope behind it, which is what a lot of people commented on the Q&A. But also, I think that this was a sort of an example of a director who is playing around with that age-old problem of the socialist, the possibilities of a socialist utopia and how they're continually thwarted. So, whether that's just because of the power of the economic system, but then in the commune, the people are bringing their own psychologies and their own hypocrisies and their own hierarchies. It never can be this perfect egalitarian utopia, and you see them having arguments, and one of the couples that were together, the female character gets really annoyed at the man who's kind of, it's my politics to not do any work. Do you know what I mean? So I wondered what you thought about that, because and whether you felt it was kind of a hopeful film or there was a sort of undercurrent of pessimism that sort of socialist idea has never kind of really come to fruition in reality.
Yeah, I think overall it was difficult to sort of see these characters really get nowhere with what on the face of it should be an achievable goal, but the film would clearly said that this idealism of socialism is not achievable in the world we live in with the sort of capitalist model that we're a part of in Europe, and yet the music, the performances, the humor, the different characters and the experiences they had. That wonderful scene where the kids are all sliding down this muddy bank, and then the adults are all sliding down this muddy bank. That even in their disappointment and their misery, there's always humor, and so there's always hope in that regard. But with regard to the bigger picture of what the film was trying to say, it was like, it's worth the struggle, but to try and push against this system. But as things stand at the moment, it doesn't seem possible. And the thing that was obviously everyone in the room felt, this was made in 1976, the struggle was felt then, and it's felt in exactly the same way now. I mean, it was just so prescient, that these people are sort of making ends meet. What the wonderful character of Marie, who's giving pensioners in her supermarket free food and then gets thrown in jail for it. All these people trying to be kind, trying to help people, trying to come up with some model that will make life happier and more achievable and less of a struggle for everyone. And yet, they all end up losing in a way, and yet they have each other, and that's what film can do. You're sort of, ultimately you realize, this is a set of actors acting out some ideas from a script or an improvised script. And, but it felt so, the characters felt so real, and so it was so touching to see them fall in and out with each other. And, considering it was so long ago, you just felt like all these themes are still in our lives now. And it's just brilliant when cinema does that.
Without a shadow of a doubt, it was just incredible how I was just thinking so many ways that, oh God, that's just happening now. That is something we're thinking about all the time. That's something we're wrestling with all the time. And even like the representation of women. And we didn't really touch on this. And Caroline in the bar afterwards was like, "Oh, God damn it, I wish I'd have talked more about that," you know. And I think she's gonna phone me up and we're gonna record some voice notes about that, because I know she wanted to talk more about that. But it kind of crept. I think that the intention of the director was to try and make the men and women, again, sort of more egalitarian, but there was still a kind of, you know, that male auteurist viewpoint kind of crept in, I think, at the edges. I don't know whether you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and that may be the times it was made in, you know. But yeah, I'd be really interested to see what Caroline thought of that, since she's seen this film a lot. And, you know, I feel like, you know, we need to watch it again to see it from these different angles so we can watch it. Because there's so much to take in on the first viewing. You know, not just within the characters and their stories, but the structure of it, the way they filmed it, and, you know, the way it just leaps from one idea to another into dream sequences and so on. But yeah, that was definitely, you know, because it was also its time, and we were sort of really loving being in that time period and seeing these costumes. And, you know, it's obviously a world where there's no internet and no real technology is apparent. People are sitting around tables peeling potatoes or chopping onions and talking to each other, you know, which is something that's sort of gone now because everything is communication is through technology for the most part now. People don't even speak as much as they type now. So it was so invigorating, really, to see them all sitting around a table bashing out their dreams of socialism to each other, all with different variations. It was a real pleasure. Whilst, you know, making their own food and drinking whatever they were drinking. It was very sort of nostalgic in that regard. And yet what they were talking about, fear of losing their job, how nothing's changed, you know, how the ideological stuff about the exploitation of the workers and so on, you know, that stuff that's happening, you know, this year in our country. You see it everywhere now. And so it was just so prescient, amazing.
Yeah, and maybe just to finish off, we could sort of mention the Q&A itself, because like I said beforehand, it was, you never know what sort of audience you're going to get, especially for a film like this. And there were a couple of absolute, just beautiful stories there. You know, reactions to the movie that seemed intensely personal. You know, I think that the woman who spoke about wanting to bring her friend, you know, she was on the verge of tears when she was talking about the film, and it was just, it was really poignant, I thought.
Yeah, for sure. And that story about these two children who were called Jonah because of this film, you know, was just amazing. And it was so tantalizing that she didn't really say why they weren't here, but it was so tantalizing that was a part of it. And I'm sure from a cinematic point of view, the fact that it's so hard to see this film, that I'm sure a lot of people in the room, I mean, we weren't a massive group, but it was a really good group, had come because it's so hard to see this film. And that's what, you know, cinema can do sometimes. We all have different tastes, and some of us have favorite films that nobody's ever heard of and so on. And so occasionally they pop up somewhere, and of course you rush back to see them on the screen because they're so much more meaningful there. But yeah, she had a very strong reaction. And then the gentleman who had been in prison and had really fought, you know, literally fought by the sounds of it for his Marxist ideals, if I'm remembering that correctly, for him to talk about that life that he'd had back then and then gone into, was it teaching? And it was absolutely fascinating that this film had sort of brought these two life experiences out into the room to be shared. It was really brilliant to be there to hear that.
Yeah, it really sort of it made it all worthwhile on a level that went beyond just either the pleasure of watching or, you know, the more critical intellectualizing that we tend to do an awful lot, maybe too much on the podcast, but generally when we're talking about films, it seems we're maybe outside of that sense that they hold a political, a social, and a cultural value that maybe they once did. But it just shows you that cinema can still do that. And maybe it is like these small events as you know, the idea of repertory cinema in the UK is kind of non-existent really outside London. I mean, I know obviously Manchester Home will do occasional things like this, but everybody has to, and especially coming out of COVID, I think cinemas have to just try and get audiences back. So I don't know. Like you say, I'm hoping to get the details about where this was sourced from, the film, and see if we can get a sort of copy available, because there isn't. It's very hard to get a hold of. But yeah, I mean, it sort of restored my faith again in the idea of the cinematic experience being able to really touch your soul for, if I want to get all, wishy-washy about it.
Yeah, no, it was definitely there that. Yeah, it's hard to talk about because exactly you don't want to go over the top about it, but there's something about being in a cinema and seeing a film that looks and feels as old as that film is from 1976. And, even seeing the sprocket, well, not the sprocket marks, but the real change marks in the top right, whatever the transfer was done, the way the graphics kind of wobbled a bit. And all that is just, that's the history of what we've been through in our lifetime of watching films, and to sort of be taken back to that was also like a deep pleasure. But being able to see this film, for me, just to be able to be in Manchester and just turn up and see it is amazing, because I don't know how else I would have seen it, unless it had been on as you say, at the BFI in London. No one else is going to be showing this. I mean, maybe because Alain Tanner's died, there might be a few more retrospectives of his work around where people can see it. But I was just so glad to see it on the screen.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, James, for doing this at short notice. I really appreciate it, and for suggesting Blood Simple, which I'm sure you're really up for.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. We'll talk about it at the time. But yeah, the Coen brothers are very important to me. And I'm really looking forward to talking about where it all started for them.
Brilliant. Well, this has been the first episode of the new season. I just want to say thanks so much to Caroline Catz, really. I mean, she flew back over from a job that she's doing in Europe to fulfill her promise to do this, because we planned it for so long, and she could have really easily just said, look guys, I just can't do it, I've got this big job on. But she didn't. She came back. She was absolutely brilliant, and we're so glad that she's become a friend of the podcast, along with James. So great to have such wonderful film people on board for our continuing journey on the show. Welcome back to everybody who is listening. I'm probably going to record a bonus on maybe talking a little bit about Godard. I know we haven't mentioned him, conspicuous by his absence on this podcast, but yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit about his legacy on the bonus episode. But until next time, that is it. Thank you for listening. This has been the Cinematologist Podcast.